All right, guys. So before we get into the last sugya of Masechet Avodah Zarah, first of all, I just want to give some hakarat hatov, a little bit of appreciation to you guys, my 8th grade class. I started working on this Masechet a ridiculous amount of time ago, something around 8 years ago, right? Having left yeshiva, been out in the working world teaching. Obviously, I learned a tremendous amount of Torah just with you guys and preparing for classes and everything, but I wanted to do some kavua Gemara learning, and I found that eventually that got put way on the back burner, unfortunately. At the beginning of this year, we were talking about elements of tshuva, setting goals for ourselves about things that we can do better. And one of the things that I said was, I want to finish this Masechet, and I want to be kovea itim leTorah. I want to have fixed time for Torah, and I actually want to make some movement through Shas. And so that was the goal that I made along with you guys. And you guys have kept me really honest over the past few months. I thought I might finish the Masechta much earlier, but as time went on, you guys were keeping me honest by asking me, Rabbi Ben, have you finished your Masechta? What are you doing? No, I haven't finished my Masechta. Rabbi Ben, why not? Well, I've been very busy. I don't have a lot of time. Well, you made time for jiu-jitsu, haven't you? Right? And so these were the conversations that took place. Yeah, of course, I made time for jiu-jitsu. Then make time for Torah. So that was the musar that I got from you guys over the past few months. That you're right. So I had to. So basically, over the past few months, I've been able to set more consistent time and stay on track, and I've been able to finish this Masechta. Now, ironically, not exactly by plan, the timing wound up being a little bit ironic, interesting, I don't know. As you guys know, my father's yahrzeit was not that long ago, but also, so I finished this Masechta on Shabbat. Monday was my father's birthday, right? So, in fact, he would have been 80 years old on Monday. And as you guys know, we've actually spoken about this. My father and I have a lot of things in common. Among them, his 3 great hobbies and loves of his life was doing martial arts, learning Torah, and playing music. And those are some things that we always had in common. So I would like to dedicate the learning that I've done, Lezecher Avi Mori, in the remembrance of my father. If you see the Mishnah, okay, that I marked on your guys' papers, this Mishnah that this is coming off of at the end talks about the kashrut of different types of eating vessels and utensils that you get from a non-Jew. Okay, if you purchase seemingly used utensils from a non-Jew, what do you need to do to make sure that they are kosher? Okay, and most of these laws we actually get from the war with Midian in the Torah, right? When they made war with the Midianites, they plundered the Midianite stuff, as one does, and they had to make sure that they were kosher afterwards, and some of them you had to kosher with water, some of them you kosher with fire, and all of that. So the Mishnah has gone through a variety of different kinds of vessels until we get to the sakin, the knife. That is the last one. So the Mishnah says, Hasakin shafa v'hi tehora. The knife, you do this thing that is shafa in Hebrew, and we'll talk about what that means, and then it is pure. Okay, so the whole conversation of the Gemara actually hinges a little bit on how we understand this word shafa. And if we look at the understanding of the Rashi and the Rambam, we're going to see that it fundamentally changes how we understand the Gemara. So Rashi says earlier, all right, in an earlier Mishnah, shafa lotsha be'even shel nefachim, that you sharpen it with a blacksmith's stone. right? So essentially, you sharpen it with a whetstone. So once you've done this sharpening, seemingly you've removed whatever non-kosher material, okay? He explains over here a little bit different. He says, V'yesh omrim mishav shefa bebeged semer she'eno chalak u'ma'avir sham nunita. All right, he says that you wipe it off with a piece of wool cloth that's not smooth, like a rough wool cloth, and you remove whatever kind of grease or fats that are on the knife. Okay, so keep that in mind, that seemingly Rashi doesn't really care about whether you're just wiping it off or whether you're grinding it off. Either way, essentially, you're just kind of wiping off the grease, right? So keep that idea in the back of your mind. Okay, so the Gemara starts, Amar Rav Ukva bar Chama, right? Rav Ukva bar Chama says, Noatza asara pa'amim bekarka. He says, you stab it into the ground 10 times, okay? In reference to how do you kasher the knife, right? You stab it into the ground 10 times. Amar Rav Huna, bare de Rav Yehoshua, bekarka she'ena Avodah, right? So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, it has to be ground that is not worked, that hasn't been plowed. It has to be hard soil, okay? It can't just be like soft, potting soil. It has to be something that's really going to scrape it. Amar Rav Kahana, ubesakin yafeh she'en ba gumot. And if you have a knife that is really nice, it's really smooth, there's not any cracks and crevices, it's a well-made knife, right? That is when you can stab it in the ground, okay? But if it's a poorly made knife that has lots of imperfections in it, you have to do something else. All right, Tanya Nami Hachi, right? The Mishnah also says that Sakin Yafeh she'en ba gumot noatza asara pa'amim bekarka amar Rav Huna bare de Rav Yehoshua le'echol batzonen. Okay, so this is another important part. So the Mishnah says that if you have a good knife that doesn't have any cracks and crevices and imperfections, then you can stab it into the ground 10 times. And all of this is specifically to eat cold food, okay? Notice we have a knife, we can cut up our vegetables, we can do things to do our food prep if the food is cold, right? Says Rashi, right? V'le'echol batzonen, to eat cold food, right? Everybody see that one? It's like the second one I highlighted. Aval davar roteach asur lachtoch ba'ad sheyagilena berotachim v'kli rishon. So says Rashi, right? If you want to use it for something that's hot, you have to cleanse it with hot water and with a kli rishon, which means the actual pot that was boiling, right? The actual boiling water pot. Okay. So, okay. Let's take a step back a sec, okay? Remember I said that word shafa was going to be the really, really important part, okay? So Rashi has said that could be that it means that you're grinding it off a little bit with the whetstone, cleaning off the cutting edge. It could be that you're wiping it off with some form of wool cloth that's a little bit rough, okay? So seemingly, if you're Rashi, what's happening in this Gemara is we're kind of building our levels of stringency. The Mishnah says that you have to wipe it off, okay? And that just wipes off whatever oils or fats are on there. The Gemara says, not only do you have to do that, all right, but you really have to stick it in the ground. It has to be hard ground, and that's going to be something that is going to scour it off a little bit better. All right, so we have that. That's essentially Rashi's reading. Okay, says the Rambam a little bit differently. Halokeach sakin min hagoy, a person who buys a knife from a non-Jew, milabna be'esh o mashchiza berechaim, right? You have to actually burn it white hot with fire, or sharpen it with a millstone. Why he says millstone, rechaim, and Rashi says Evan shel nefachim. I don't know, it might be just the times they lived in. It might be that the Rambam is giving psak halacha for a normal person, and a normal person might have a stone to mill their wheat in their home. It might just be a more accessible thing. That I don't know, okay? But basically, he's making the equivalency here between actually burning it off, which is one step more stringent even than boiling it, okay? And that is essentially the same as sharpening it, right? So the sharpening it is a very, very intensive process now, according to the Rambam. It's not just that it's essentially equivalent to wiping it off. You're actually grinding material off. So of course it's going to be a very intensive process. Im hayta sakin yafa she'en ba pgimot, right? And says the Rambam, like the Gemara, if it's a really nice knife that doesn't have any imperfections, dailo im na'atsa bekarka kashe, right? So he says, now when the Gemara comes and says you stab it in the ground 10 times, it's actually bringing you a kula. It's actually saying, well, you know, if it's a nice knife and you're only going to, I should read the next part, ve'ochel batzonen, and to eat cold food. All right. So if you're going to only eat cold food, I have a kula for you. I have sort of an easier way to do it. And the easier way to do it is you stab it into the ground. Okay. Whereas for Rashi, that's actually a stringency. All right. Does that make sense? All right. So guys, this is a really, really fundamentally different way of understanding the Gemara. So now if you're Rashi, the Gemara is structured, right? You wipe it off. No, I have an extra stringency that you have to stab it in the ground. But if you want to eat it with hot food, you have to boil it. For the Rambam, if you want to eat it with hot food, you could sharpen it also, right? But if you only want to eat it with cold food, or if you only want to use it for cold food, right, then you can stab it in the ground 10 times, and that's kind of like, all right, you're bringing a kula. All right, Chevre, the Gemara ends with a story, and this story brings tremendous musar. Okay, it gives us a real picture in how the sages view the big picture of the Gemara. Okay, so the story is this. It's kind of a funny story. Ki ha demar Yehuda u bati bar tuvi havu yetve kame de shavur malka. So Mar Yehuda and this guy named Bati Bar Tovi were sitting before Shavur Malka, who was the Persian king at the time. Okay, and seemingly he was a rather knowledgeable guy, even though he was an Ovid Avodah Zarah. He, in fact, was very knowledgeable about halacha and had very strong relationship with the Jewish people. Aitu kamaihu etroga, right? So the servants brought an etrog before the king. Pasak achal, he cut off a piece and he ate it. Pasak v'havle lebati bar tovi, he cut off a piece and he gave it to this guy named Bati Bar Tovi. Hadar, datza asara zimne be'ara. So then he went back and he stabbed the knife 10 times in the ground. Pasak havle le Mar Yehuda. And then he cut off a piece and gave it to Mar Yehuda. Okay, very interesting, right? So this is like halacha in action. Very beautiful. This guy is very knowledgeable about Torah. Amar le Bati Bar Tuvi, ve'ahu gavra lav bar Yisrael hu. So it says Bati Bar Tuvi, am I not also a Jew? Right? You are careful about the kashrut of Mar Yehuda, but you're not careful about the kashrut for me. Am I not also a Jew? You hear the question, right? Like he's insulted. You're handing me McDonald's and you're handing this guy kasher lemahadrin. I don't know. Izzy's. Yeah, Izzy's. Beautiful. All right. So he's very hurt. Amar le. So the king says back to him, and there's 2 versions of the story, and each one of these versions gives kind of a different picture of the musar that the king is giving them. Amar le, mar kimli begavaihu, v'mar lo kimli begavaihu. So says the one version, right? This guy, I know him, right? I know him. I know that he's careful about kashrut. I know he's careful about the mitzvot. You, I'm not so sure about, right? Fair enough. Fair enough. If you have a problem with it, say something, right? Says Rashi, Rav Yehuda, makir ani, I know this Rabbi Yehuda, shehu parush v'lo yochal davar isur. I know him that he is separate from things that he's not supposed to do, and he's not going to eat something that he's not supposed to. Aval becha eni muchzak shetehe parush kol kach. You, I don't know whether you're so careful at all, right? So I just gave you what I'm eating. Fair enough. There's a different version. All right. Ika da amre. There are those who say, right? Alternative version. Amar le, idkar my avadet beorta. Boom. This is a nuclear bomb. Says the king to Bati Bartovi, I know what you did last night. Why didn't you give me kosher food too? Bro, I know what you did last night. Okay, so what's the connection here? All right, so it says Rashi, right? Derech parsiim limso nashim leachsaniim. It was the way of the Persians at the time that when they have guests, they send women to them, right? So you get a knock on your door at night. Hello. V'kisha shigram lahem balayla she'avar kibel bati v'rav Yehuda lo kibel. All right, so last night, right, the king knew. He sent women to Bati Bartovi, and he received them. He sent women to Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda did not receive them. So what's the connection, right? What's the connection between kashrut? We're not talking about the women. We're talking about what we're eating. So, chevre, there are two tremendous pieces of musar here. And one of them is, we've just finished Masechet Avodah Zarah. What's Masechet Avodah Zarah all about? Well, it's a lot of rabbinic harchakot, a lot of rabbinic laws that give us a sense of distancing ourselves from the surrounding non-Jewish culture, the surrounding immoral activities of the people of the time, right? Remember, these are Jews living in Babylon, living in Israel under Roman rule, right? These are Jews who are surrounded by a tremendous amount of idolatry and immoral behavior. They felt the need to create a lot of extra rules in addition to the regular rules of kashrut in order to create distancing to keep us from the immoral activities of the surrounding culture. That is the purpose of those laws. Bati Bartuvi seemingly doesn't really care that much about the general principles of morality. Okay, he is not behaving himself in a generally ethical and moral way. The whole purpose of the laws of the kashrut is to keep you from that, right? So by his very actions, the ideas of kashrut just aren't shaykh to him, especially when we're talking about the rabbinic harchakot. Okay, so I think that's a tremendous piece of musar for us, because sometimes we as Jewish people have a tendency to get so involved in all of the details of Shmirat HaMitzvot that we can lose the big picture of what it's all for, right? We are meant to be good people. We are meant to conduct ourselves in a moral way, in an ethical way. That's what it is, okay? And Baruch Hashem, we have wonderful mitzvot that help us get there. There's a second bit of musar that I think is a little bit more subtle. As I said, the entire Masechta is about distancing ourselves from immoral and idolatrous cultures and practices. Guys, Even Rav Yehuda here, he's sitting and hanging out with Shover Malka, right? He is sitting and hanging out with this idolatrous king. So I think there's something to the fact that even though we do create these symbols, we do create these ways of remembering and reminding ourselves that we do have to stay separate and we do have to keep ourselves on a higher moral level, that doesn't mean you completely remove yourself from society. That doesn't mean that you're going and sitting on a mountaintop somewhere and you're not involved in the culture at all, right? We are deeply involved, even with all of those things that help give us those reminders.